Hello and welcome to the COP30 sessions live from High House here in Belém, Brazil. This year's COP marks the 10-year anniversary of the historic Paris Agreement, when the world's governments agreed a framework to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees of pre-industrial levels. Translated to plain speaking, it means to avoid a climate catastrophe. Pre-Paris, the worst predictions were for over 5 degrees of warming, but this week the UN Secretary-General announced the measures now promised by governments would take us to 2.3. But how much can governments really take the credit? There's been huge innovation driven by businesses, individuals who've changed their behaviour, and crucially, there's the states, regions, cities and provinces who actually make the decisions on spending, energy and much more. To discuss the role of subnational governments, I'm delighted to be joined by Laurence Tubiana, President and CEO of the European Climate Foundation and Special Envoy to COP30, often called one of the architects of the Paris Agreement. Also, Champa Patel, Executive Director for Governments and Policy at the Climate Group, which acts as the Secretary for the Under2 Coalition, a network of over 200 subnational governments covering 1.75 billion people and over half the world's GDP. Laurence, let me start with you. If 10 years ago you were able to see the world in 2025, what would have surprised you about how far we've come?
Well, a lot of things. Maybe first the extension of the climate awareness, if I may say so, to the whole world, to the whole government, to the whole societies. Today, 10 years after Paris, you between 70 or 80% of the citizens in most than 130 countries that where the polls recently were done are concerned about climate change, identify it, and want action. So the citizen base, which is very important in my view, in particular when we talk about subnational, it was unprecedented. Many people didn't know, didn't relate to that. Of course, the second aspect, which is better known, is the extraordinary development of the and diffusion of technologies and transformation of transport, housing, so many things, and of course, electrification of whole systems. So the technology has gone faster and faster in an unprecedented way. For example, I would not have imagined that today 50% of the market of cars in China would be electric. So these numbers are just spoke for themselves. The third element I think is very important is everyone, and that was the philosophy of Paris Agreement, but nothing was granted. That everyone from cities to region and state and business and governments as well took Paris Agreement as a goal for themselves. And they want to align, even if, of course, each of them have a different decision-making system. They want Paris to be there. And of course, the wonderful or the more striking example was when Trump, the first mandate of Trump, decided to withdraw from Paris Agreement. And again, I repeat always this phrase, which is really so nice. He said, I want to take care more of the inhabitants of Pittsburgh than Paris. And the mayor of Pittsburgh said, we in Pittsburgh, we are taking Paris Agreement seriously. We are following Paris goals. So this sharing of the goals altogether was something, of course, which was hoped for, but of course I was not sure. And finally, I would say the citizen movement, the youth mobilization at different moments, and now you have 1,500 cases against companies or governments that are not trustful to their commitments in every zone of the world. Recently, of course, as you see, the Vanuatu students go for the International Court of Justice saying because of all of the government, you sign Paris Agreement, but you don't implement it. So, this is a revolution in mindset, in policies. Now every country has a climate law, more or less. Every country has NDC. You could not imagine that before 2015. So it's a new world, but at the same time, it's recent. It's only 10 years. And in 10 years, you can do so much. And that my regret, of course, we should have done that 20 years ago and not 10 years ago.
Of course, but we're doing something now, particularly here at a subnational level. Champa, could you make it real for the audience at a subnational level? What are people doing? How does it work?
Well, I think firstly, I have to commend Laurence, who's been a champion for cities, states, and regions from the very beginning of the Paris Agreement and really created that space for that level of leadership to flourish. And I think one thing to recognize is, particularly in federal countries, there's power. So states, regardless of what's happening at the national level, can really push forward on the acceleration that's needed. And I think we've really seen that level of leadership step into that space. And what does that look like? So, for example, if you look at carbon pricing instruments globally, 44% of those are at the subnational level. So this is not just developed economies. Everybody's familiar with what California is doing. They're doing incredible work. They have their own carbon market with Quebec in Canada, and Washington State hopefully will join from the US, which is a cross-jurisdictional carbon market. But it's our developed economies, like the level of creativity and innovation, like Querétaro in Mexico has a carbon tax. It's the polluter pays principle on fossil fuel emitters. And they use the proceeds of that to fund their biodiversity preservation. So it's a really tangible way of saying you're polluting industry, we're going to tax this industry and use that to conserve the forests. So I think they're really great examples of what's possible at that level.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of discussion at this COP and in the run-up about some sort of formal recognition for cities, for subnational government. How would that work, Laurence? Because the negotiations are hard enough as they are. What could we realistically do?
So my vision of Paris now, we have 10 years of thinking and evolution, is that we need a step forward. Why? Because we have to fill the gap first. And we see that there is an unbalance in accountability because, in a way, governments decide and present, there is a sort of peer review, but you don't feel the pressure on them to deliver more. And they have very careful about managing the different interests, their political economy inside. And so the dynamic is not there because, in a way, because we have to go faster. So that for me, and again, in Paris, my idea was it could not happen there, but now it's happening, that the cities and the region together, because IT, like you said, it's the two, should have their NDC integrated into the national one. It's coming, but it's coming informally. Yeah. I would like that we go now a step formal recognition. There are options. My preferred option that we go for a setting of implementation for accelerating and, in a way, NDC we have over, or in a way, reaching more what is commitment, thanks to the combination of intervention and proposal of cities and region and government together with, of course, the business and the financial communities. I think it's a different setting. I don't know if we get there, but certainly I think this is a solution now.
I mean, it's very interesting what you're saying. Oh, please, go on.
Just on that, I think it's almost like you need an inside-outside strategy because cities, states, and regions, because they're not bound by the process, can move with speed and agility. So I think it's how do they apply external pressure from being adjacent to the process, so not outside of it, but adjacent to it, where they can really showcase implementation, really amplify the leadership, and really push for what's needed from national governments, as well as having a mechanism through which national governments can be held accountable through the NDC process, through the reporting process for how they engage in their subnationals. So I think you need a bit of both, because what we wouldn't want to see is any constraints or any dampening of the ambition or the agility of the subnationals to move ahead further and really shape the real economy, right? It's the real economy that's driving the change that's needed, like renewables. I mean, who would have thought renewables are going to be the biggest source of energy? It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting looking at how this COP has worked. And Laurence, on your point about the formal and the informal, obviously there's no formal American delegation here, but informally, what we have seen at a subnational level is a huge presence on the ground, What do you make of that? How is that working here? Because America is here.
That many years I'm doing these things on climate, and I saw US come and go many times. Just remember Kyoto Protocol, for example. So for me, it was a deep, and because I had a long discussion with, at that time, Jerry Brown, the governor of California, and many mayors, of course, Anne Hidalgo convened 1,000 miles in Paris. I felt this was a safety net for Paris Agreement. Maybe the politics will change, and with US, you will never know. But then, if you have really anchored into the local actors, because they report to their citizen, and because I was betting on citizen awareness, so the safety net for me was evident, and it worked. So, and beyond that, I think this back and forth of ambition is a precious mechanism we have to nurture. Of course, this, if we set up something more in a way outside the process, it has to report to the process to put pressure on the process itself, because we need to be accountable on all sides. And business has to be accountable as well. We saw the action agenda, so many initiatives without any reporting back. So we need to streamline this. And I see, because of the relation between these local authorities and their citizens, is a form of accountability that the business doesn't have, and somehow the government, whether they are authoritarian regime or democratic, doesn't have so directly on climate. So that's why I'm very well. That was my position from the start. But now we really have to go forward and propose something more structured.
Yeah, absolutely. And let me ask Champa about California specifically, because Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is here. You were with him yesterday. He's mobbed wherever he goes. And if you look at the California, I always forget the number. It's the seventh or eighth largest economy, and the fourth now. Wow,
Yes.
there you go. I mean,
Silicon
the
Valley.
power that he has there is greater than a lot of the national leaders who are here at COP.
Yeah, I mean, it's a large economy. So obviously, anybody who leads an economy like that is going to draw attention because of the resources and the capacities they have to really move forward with pace. But what we really value about California's leadership is how much they do to, in the space of international collaboration, how much they're doing to showcase and amplify the voices of states and regions who don't have the size of their economy, who don't have the same resources to play with. So they've been real leaders in making sure that the smaller states and regions are also able to move forward. One example, California is one of the founder governments for the Subnational Methane Action Coalition. This is bringing together states and regions to try and reduce their methane emissions as quickly as possible, which is much needed because you could do everything on decarbonization, but we still need to tackle methane emissions as well. So I think they've been great champions both domestically in the current political moment, but also internationally as well.
Right. Laurence, any thoughts on when we talk about subnational governments? There's such a huge range, isn't there? And also in terms of autonomy. I mean, if you look at some countries, I think Greece, 6% of their economy is spent at a subnational level. If you look at some other countries, it's over 60%. So there's such a huge variation in terms of subnational governments' ability to affect change.
So, of course, because that the capacities, the resources available, but at the same time, this type of political system that allows its independence and growth at the more local level. But I want to raise something interesting. What I see from Paris, and just starting from there, the international role of subnational is a total novelty. It was not existing before. There are some representation, of course, by Italy and others at UN, but these roles that these politicians are as well international politicians and work for the global cause as well for their own local citizen. This is really a sort of shortcut between, action on the ground and the global public good. And I think that from the democratic point of view, I think this is really, really important. That's why I value enormously not only what they can do at home and with their government or not, but as they represent the direct. And that's why I am so much in favor of participative processes to have really citizens speaking on the global scene as well, We need to embrace these global public goods, every one of us. And I think this level of the subnational is really important. That's why I saw, whether it is Edward Parish or Greg Newsom, they are standing at global level as global leaders. And I think this is very, very powerful.
Absolutely. Both, thank you very much for your time
Thank
today.
you.
That's all we have time for, but there's lots more happening here at High House over the course of COP30. We'll be looking beyond the headlines to the issues that really matter. Do join us for more.